And now, A Native Podcast with Matt and Zach.
And welcome back to another episode of A Native Podcast. I am Zach, and with me as always is Matt. And I got to start it off that way as always and say, Matt, buddy, how are we doing today?
Doing okay.
Just okay?
Earlier I have to say, man, this sounds like a real native story, but it's real short. But I go out to my truck and it was kind of cold today, and I turn over my key and it's click 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 click, and I think it's time for a new battery.
Baby, have you changed the battery yet on it ever?
Nope. And I know that's exactly what it is because
Seven to
it
10
was
years.
a Ford battery, and I've had that in there for 3 years since I bought the truck.
Maybe.
Who knows how long before it's been in there?
Oh, I see what you say. Yeah. So yeah, 7 to 10 years is what they say.
That's my little story for today. Replace your batteries, people, when the weather gets cold.
I remember when the Jeep did that. That's why the Honda, I don't know if I turn the Honda on, it might still be running.
Oh,
You're talking about the cold. I kind of laugh a little bit because today I went to the storage unit, and I'm standing out. It's sunny. Wow, it's a nice day, like standing there. And then I go and look at the temperature, -2. I'm like, oh
oh,
wow, but it's been -20. So like when you get that 20-degree like heat wave, you're like, all right, like it's warming up.
yeah.
Like,
That's when you know you're adjusted to cold, when -2 feels kind of good.
when it was like 30 the other day,
Oh,
I was in a sweatshirt like all day, like just like sweatshirt jeans. You know what I
just
mean? Like 30
yeah.
degrees. You're like, oh, this is great because it was like that. It's that fluctuation, man. It's that cold temperature. And like speaking of cold temperature, I loaded up your meat. I
Oh,
got your meat coming your way. You're talking, I was out there. It's just in the back of the truck. I just threw it in the back.
cold
So
enough.
it'll be frozen on the way over. Should be good. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. We're not going to talk about those crazy stories, but they're crazy. They're fun. We're here to talk with our friend Connor Kankelborg of All My Relatives podcast. He's on Spotify, so please go check him out. He has a really good interview with Chris Latreille, who's a Little Shell author, and talks about Chris Latreille's book. It's a really cool podcast that he's got going on, kind of about himself and his family and finding himself. The way we talk a little bit about it in today's episode. You'll hear. But before we get into that, Matt buddy, do we have a fun fact or no?
Today was a truck story, my man.
That was all right.
That was Matt's native story of the day. Be sure to replace those batteries. And as we know, Indian country, a lot of it is some cold weather. So
Oh, I've been seeing on Fort Pat Red Super Center, the
might,
Facebook group. Come
might
jump
not make it to
jumper
bingo.
cable. I need to. Yeah,
Might not make it to bingo if you have a dead battery.
we won't. Not tonight. Not tonight, Grandma. But if you're staying at home, you can listen to the podcast. You can listen to us on Spotify, YouTube, iTunes, wherever you may get podcasts. You can find us. Just type A Native Podcast with Matt and Zach in, and we should pop up. You should see the microphone with the headdress. And do us a favor, subscribe, like, add, thumbs up, anything. It all helps us out. Any little thing you can do. So we really do appreciate it. Without further ado, we're going to jump into some commercials first. Then we'll bring on Connor.
Did you know there's a new native apparel company?
No, I did not.
It's called Shop LS 574, named after the 574 federal tribes and the Little Shell descendancy of its founders.
Wow, that's really cool, man.
It is. It is becoming a spot to order native apparel by and for natives, working with native designers and teams to help best represent Indian country.
That's awesome, dude.
For sure. Now make sure to go pick up some Native podcast swag as well as other native gear while shopping at shopls574.com.
Oh, yeah. And do not forget to use code ANP10 to save on your next order.
That's ANP10. Hey Matt, did you know there's a tribally owned net company?
No, I did not.
Not only are they tribally owned, but Blue Ribbon Nets also creates totally sustainable products. With Blue Ribbon Nets, not only are you getting quality nets, but even eco-friendly ones as well.
That's awesome, dude.
It sure is indeed. Make sure to use code RUGAROO10 on your next Blue Ribbon Net order to save. Again, the code is RUGAROO10, RUGARU10.
I am definitely getting a Blue Ribbon net now.
Tune in every Tuesday to hear your favorite native podcast.
That's right. A Native Podcast has new episodes every week, ranging from boarding schools to Indian child welfare.
Not only that, but we have Indian country covered from Maine to California and Florida to Alaska, Hopi to Blackfeet and Choctaw to Tlingit, and all those Crees in between.
And all you other natives and non-natives out there, we want to remind you to tune in this Tuesday to A Native Podcast.
All right, everybody. We'd like to welcome our guest on today. Our guest is Connor Kankelborg. He is with All My Relatives, right? That's the name title of your podcast, correct?
Yes, all my relatives.
All My Relatives. That is his podcast. He's Little Shell. So if you guys didn't read the description, that's kind of the connection there. And me and Connor connected over Instagram and I've been talking about doing this episode, talking about his podcast, talking about kind of what's going on in Little Shell in our world. So I'll let you introduce yourself and then we'll get into it.
Sounds great. Tanchi Kiawao, Connor Dishnakashon, and that's Miche for hello, how are you all? My name's Connor. Like Zach was saying, I'm a first generation descendant of the Little Shell tribe of Chippewa Indians in Montana, and I'm also a member of the Manitoba Metis Federation. I currently live in Tacoma, Washington with my wife, and I'm actually completing my clinical doctorate in occupational therapy right now.
Wow, that's crazy. I've thought about going for a master's. I could only think a doctorate, all the work and time that you, all the library hours.
Oh yeah,
Well,
definitely.
Connor, I have I'm it's not quite complete my master's degree, but I'm like right there. It's in interdisciplinary studies, but what I was focusing on was health disparities with the Pine Ridge Reservation, which is where
Okay.
I'm called Oglala, Lakota, and just health, physical health, nutrition, big area. I see you do weightlifting, so we'll connect another time probably about that.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Well,
masters.
you
That's
also grew up on the Colville Reservation too?
me.
Yes, Connor. Yes.
So I grew up in Longview, Kalama, which is pretty close to the Cowlitz Reservation,
Outlets.
their
Okay.
ancestral
Okay.
homelands. Yeah.
Yes. I
Yeah.
read that wrong. I thought I read that wrong there.
So you're familiar with the A Casino?
Yes, I am, and it's funny you brought that up because I just registered for the it's a long name. It's like the third annual Opiate and Fentanyl Task Force of Washington, and Cowlitz is hosting it at ALNA. It's in
Oh,
May this year. Yeah, so
well, that's
Maybe
good to know about.
didn't Tulalip or one of those other ones host like the first one last year? I want to say.
I think I can't remember. I know
Oh,
Lummi hosted one. This is the third one, so I know Lummi hosted one in Northern Washington, but Tulalip could have hosted the other one for sure.
okay. Yeah, they just started doing those up there the last few years.
Yeah, so yeah, I actually just registered today, so pretty excited to go to that later, this year.
Yeah, no, that'll be
Yeah.
exciting. Sure. Is that in regards to your degree or just for fun there?
Yeah, so a little bit of both. I'll have graduated by then, but it's related to my degree, so I'm still registered to go. My research actually super similar to Matt's is around health disparities, and then taking the occupational therapy lens is how can a practitioner of a Western health practice
Right.
provide services for Indigenous people and what you can do to really make it culturally safe and relevant. And so the last 6 months of my clinical doctorate, I've been with DSHS here in Washington, Department of Social Health Services, and this very last 3 month period, I'm working with the Behavioral Health Administration and Tribal Affairs with them. And so we do a lot around resources that tribes can utilize to really increase the services they're providing for their own members and clients to hopefully increase, access to services and health outcomes. And so the work group task force that's coming up in the end of May at ALNA is part of that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Do you have any examples of some of those with like how that some of those examples with tribes of like what you're talking about?
Yeah, so for instance, right now the big project I'm working on, there's actually two that I'm uh, pretty stoked that I get to do this for my clinical doctorate in occupational therapy because not many people do, and I'm really thankful for the opportunity that my supervisor kind of provided me with. But the one of the projects we're working on right now is creating a resource handout for all the discharge planners that are in the Behavioral Health Administration facilities in Washington, so that if they have an enrolled citizen or a first or second generational descendant, they know the resources that are either available in the community, or if they're discharging back to the reservation, what resources the tribes have there for the clients. And so a lot of times right now, the discharge planners, especially the majority don't come from an indigenous background, and so they don't have familiarity with what services tribes offer. And so creating a handout with all the resources for that to really try and eliminate the gap of care of somebody getting discharged from a facility and then nobody really knew they were discharging and they didn't know they had these resources available in their community. And so really trying to eliminate that gap in care so that they do have the resources as soon as they get back home, wherever that might be. And then a second project I'm working on right now with my supervisor is really trying to promote that the tribes in Washington have sovereignty because of the treaties. And so if, for instance, somebody gets civilly committed or detained in a behavioral health facility, if they're a foreign national, they either, if they're the nation of origin is on a mandatory list of notification, then that nation gets notified. And if not, the client then is at least given the right that you have the right to have your country of origin notified. And so they actually, they're in the process of doing that with tribes here in Washington since they are sovereign nations. It's just it's a bit, it's kind of a newer side of things, and so it's not always put into practice by different agencies and departments. So really trying to go through all the revised code in the Washington revised code of Washington, the RCW, to cite all the sources that say like foreign nationals, those nations have to be notified. And because of the treaty rights of indigenous tribes being sovereign nations, they need to be notified if an enrolled member is civilly committed or detained.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. I mean, it's good. It's needed work because you're absolutely right. We don't have that representation in these programs and these positions. I mean, I get the whole DEI arguments that people want to make, whatever, right? But like bottom line, when it comes down to this native stuff, it's sovereignty, and it's the nation to nation, what you're talking about with us having that power and that authority, because this land was our land, but we were given rights because it was taken from us. We were still given some land, other tribes none, like us, the little shell. But when you look at exactly what you're saying, it's like when you put these programs in place, you have to also put yourself in the mindset of the indigenous cultures and the people and what they're growing up with. Like you're saying, you're like, people think like almost that suburban mindset sometime of like, oh, you don't know about what you have, like you're saying. And
Yeah.
yeah, no, we need it. We need the more of the advocacy. It's good that you're doing it. Um, yeah,
Yeah,
Matt.
that's what we need the our tribal lawyers
Yeah,
flexing that sovereignty muscle in the courts, especially like Jack mentioned, DEI, as Native nations as a political entity, not necessarily the race angle. And that's gonna go further when, with these fights we're having, I think.
Yeah, and that's actually I literally just got off a meeting today with the Office of Indian Policy here in Washington State, and they were actually talking about that very thing about
Mm.
creating awareness that the relationship the state has with tribes is government to government and political. And so especially in healthcare, if you're doing anything with an enrolled citizen as it pertains to a tribe, they need to know, the tribal courts need to know, the tribal attorneys need to know, and that creating awareness that it's not because of a race thing, but it's because it's a government to government political relationship. So yeah, like you said, Matt, that's like head on.
Yeah, they don't take that into consideration because
Yeah.
it's become a race thing too,
Hmm.
which is crazy. I've had it against me. I don't know. You've probably felt this same way. Where definitely I don't look the part, and I get that feeling sometimes where it's like, whoa, okay. And I've been called out before in ways where from natives saying you're not native, you don't look native, and I'm just like, wow, isn't that the pot calling the kettle black? But when you also have it in the other ways of like, I've been privileged in ways not being, because of the society we live in.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's kind of weird to walk in these two worlds,
Yeah.
experience them. I mean, growing up here in Montana, definitely. I don't know about. I had this conversation with Matt about because he kind of grew up more in Oregon, and I talked about Oregon versus like New Mexico because I grew up in New Mexico, Albuquerque. And when you look at some of these native businesses and native things going on, you have the Native American like Oregon and them are more accepting of like, okay, like here we have native businesses doing well. Let's support them. Let's get behind them. Where in Montana, it's like, oh, another native business. Oh, another. It's that setback, that like traditional stereotype that comes in, and to feel that firsthand and to see it, and when you relate it to things like you're talking about, like in healthcare or like trying to get a bank loan or simple things like that, that it just doesn't, it doesn't compute with that European mind.
Mhm.
But
Right. Yeah. And just kind of similar to you, Connor. I grew up outside of my tribal homeland, with my dad being adopted from Pine Ridge and raised in Oregon. So, I wouldn't necessarily get it with like the look part, but in college, people would assume I got all my school paid for.
Yeah.
'Cause I'm native, and I'm like, do you realize, have you been to Pine Ridge? Have you seen that tribe? Zach lives at Fort Peck, Res, and it's the same kind of thing there. Like it's like third world poverty, basically.
Yeah.
And they don't get it. Whereas my buddy maybe at Grand Ronde, he might have more resources because they're a small tribe near an urban area, right?
Mhm.
So it's every tribe's different even.
but that's the success, like you're saying, like that's
Yeah,
where some not, and I shouldn't say success because success is in the US world is measured in money, but it's
right.
where certain tribes have done well based on the cards they were dealt.
Right.
You're an urban tribe, we're going to open a casino and make
Mhm.
money. But then they have those problems. There's other, there's certain you're never
Right.
running, you're always having the problems, and how you got to address those. Um, I guess with your work in working with tribal communities, what is your goal now? Like you get your doctorate here at the end of the year. What's that next step?
So the next step is there's two things there. One, once I graduate is when I'll officially finish what they call like your doctoral capstone, which is similar to a dissertation that a PhD track might have. And so once I finish that, I'll be eligible to kind of apply that for the like a national conference to present there and have like a poster and stuff. So I think that I would really like to do that because I've been to one national conference and there wasn't a lot of information about occupational therapists working with um, indigenous communities. So I'd really like to kind of create the space for that at the national conference. There is a member organization for OTs who do work with Native communities, and they're doing pretty well. It's just really creating that representation at the national conference. So I'd like to go to that. And then after graduating, I mean, it'd be great to work somewhere local here in Western Washington with the tribes. I know a couple of them are hiring a couple outpatient occupational therapy positions. So honestly, that would be my main goal is just to find one of those positions to work in.
Is it more just to work with the tribes, or do you have other aspirations within how you can change, I guess, like Indian country in that sense? You know what I mean? Like kind of where it's like, I want to do this, but I want to also do this, Like
Yeah.
I've heard Matt say similar things where he's expressed wanting to work directly with a tribe. Um, and not necessarily his. And I guess I don't know. I haven't had that same feeling, so I'm curious.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think so occupational therapy is kind of in a unique position within the last decade. It's been growing and people have been becoming more aware of the profession. There are more positions popping up, they're hiring more. And so um, ultimately, I think it kind of relates back to my research about how can we really um, make these Western health models more applicable to indigenous communities. And so where that I will take that in the future, I'm not sure, but that's where I think the driving passion of working with a tribal community comes from for me because it's something I would like to really put into practice, work in the field, do that, be able to provide that to relatives out here in the Pacific Northwest, and then hopefully from there see what kind of
Yeah.
direction I can really take that after having practiced in the field for a little while.
No, that's cool. No, it's
Yeah.
good. And it's good that you're doing that. We need that. Clearly, if you're saying there's multiple jobs, I mean, you see that with tribes. I mean, you see it here, IHS always hiring.
Mhm.
And those travel nurses, that's the other thing people don't understand. Like, sir, they have nurses, but they're travelers. They're paying
Yeah.
more for that because it's a need. Um,
Right.
Definitely.
And I think another thing that I'm always reminded of, similar in that same vein, is that each um, tribal community can be very different from another. So uh, even within the same state, obviously, there's so many different cultures and communities within tribes. And when you have people who are contract workers or travelers, they don't always pick up on the nuances and how to care for those individuals because they
Right.
come from a Western background. And so, really being able to work in a community would be providing care relevant to that community's culture. And that sometimes won't even translate to another tribal community across the state. So really creating, I think, awareness for that would be another goal.
Oh, especially when you take someone like Colville or Coeur
Mhm.
d'Alene kind of out, Spokane tribes.
Yeah.
They are, they're out on the prairie. They're almost a buffalo people, a horse culture,
Mhm.
where you're talking about where you're at, that's salmon.
Yeah.
It's different ways of living. One's a little more nomadic. One's we're having longhouses and setting up here.
Right.
And what that stems from, not only culturally but economically over 100 years.
Hmm.
You look at like the oppressions and the different things that happen, because not necessarily every time someone from the government or from the white world comes into the community, sometimes they're only there for 6 months, a year at a time. So you don't have that trust. So there's that mistrust. So it's building that trust in our communities to help, heal that trauma.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I know that the lack of like cultural understanding is so prevalent. Zach and I work in marketing advertising for G&G advertising, and over 25 years of marketing in Indian country, it's like we work with marketing partners that are non-native, and it's like they put a totem pole on, I'm just using a random example, on a thing for the planes, and like on a messaging for the planes. It's like, what? That's not
Yeah.
planes. That's Northwest,
It's
Yeah.
it's
you
crazy.
know.
And
Yeah.
the AI, I saw actually, I don't know, there's a little shell video out there on YouTube. The guy who did it is kind of crazy from what I've heard, but it's like a speech that about the little shell people, kind of our history. And somebody to put it in AI, and like the AI video is like it's like, and they talk to indigenous people throughout the Americas, and it's like they show like South American Indian,
Oh
and they show like Pueblos. They're like they're in the town of Great Falls, and there's like
yeah.
Pueblos, and you're like, what the heck is this supposed? All AI. Just that stereotype
They-
that, yeah, it's
yeah, they show like the Mayan pyramids in Mexico or something.
Oh,
oh yes,
geez.
I'll send you the
Yeah,
video because it was just like, what
wrong country.
heck is this?
Yeah.
But it's out there. But there's good ones out there too. So you find the good ones.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm sure you know, Connor, like in health, incorporating indigenous, holistic health ways, right? Like the wellness wheel is often talked about. Like a lot of tribal health centers utilize the wellness wheel, and I know I did through some of my research as well. So, things like that. And I think people think you're taking away from Western medicine, and really it's kind of blending.
Hmm.
Because obviously Western medicine has its pros too. So,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. That's a really good point. And similar to that, one of my favorite examples in like my research for my degree is that they were talking about dementia specifically, and um, it was a tribal community or First Nations community in Canada, actually. And their example is in Western healthcare, they approach dementia as this declining condition that's associated with the end of life and decrease in function and everything. And that approach in this First Nations community just was a real mismatch with their culture, where
mm,
as somebody ages and they might have like signs or symptoms of dementia, it's seen as coming full circle and being closer with the creator and being at that end of the life, and it's seen as really a blessing to have lived that long. And so then when you try and treat something like that, which in the culture is a totally different representation of something, then it was just such a mismatch. So to your point, Matt, that is just in healthcare, that's definitely something that still exists.
No, I was going to ask you too. Do you have any other projects and stuff that you worked on, like when you're getting your master's or even your undergrad, that like stand out to you, or you that you find pride in and want to talk about?
Um, so my undergrad was in international studies, so it was a political science degree, so not at all related to the healthcare side of things.
Right.
And my though I'm trying to remember even the two papers I wrote, because it was political science, it was on public school funding differences between Washington and Oregon and Iranian politics. So it's not anything related to what I'm doing now. So yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Well, I mean that there was a passion. What was the passion there? That
Uh,
you want to be a lawyer?
yeah, I thought I wanted to go into international law because I like international politics, law, legal things. I really like just learning about other cultures and languages, and so I could read probably an hour or two a day just about any given language or culture on the face of the planet. So
Wow.
yeah.
That's crazy. Well, I guess what's your favorite language that you've like messed around with?
Um, Probably Machif, because there's some really good apps for learning it that I've been really trying to practice and utilize.
Yeah. Okay.
And
What
I
app?
learned, what's that?
Are there some want to list some of your favorite apps for the listeners?
Yeah, so I think my favorite one, let me see. So the organization or website is called Woodland to Prairies, I think. Or it's
Okay.
either
hmm.
are you guys familiar with that?
Is it Canadian?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I've seen it. I see some Canadian stuff, and that's something too I want to ask you, I guess, kind of after is what I guess what's that being part of a Métis Federation like? I guess we're more focused on the lower 48, I guess, in the
Hmm.
last Hawaii in that sense, not necessarily Canada.
Yeah.
I'm curious about what those organizations are like in comparison to like tribes up there, and if you could talk about that a little bit too. But
Yeah.
yeah,
For sure. So, real quick, the app is called Transparent Language. And
transparent.
on that app is where Prairies to Woodlands has posted their Machif course.
Okay,
And
cool.
so if you just type that in Google, it'll pop up. It's either prairies to woodlands or woodlands to prairies. It's one of those, but if you Google it, it'll pop up. And that's the main app I use for learning Machif whenever I have a free second or minute. And then in terms of being part of Métis Nation or the Manitoba Métis Federation, so the Manitoba Métis Federation is the only Métis Nation slash federation that enrolls citizens across the borders. So for instance, Métis Nation of Saskatchewan or Alberta don't do that, but Manitoba Métis Federation will. There's different reasons for that, and the whole political scene between the different Métis nations is kind of fuzzy right now, so won't get into that. But um, as somebody who lives in the US, that was the only one I could enroll in, so I did. And they have, I think they have the official recognition of the Canadian federal government. It's like a little sticky right now between the different Métis nations, but being a member of a Métis Nation across the border is kind of interesting because you get all the newsletters, as I'm sure you do with Little Shell, how they send out their newsletters, and you get notification of events, harvesting rights and stuff that you can't really participate in. So you're a member, but there's not a lot of participation when you're not actually in Manitoba or whatever province it may be. Other than they do host they have recently, I think the last one was in December. They wanted to hear from their members across the border. And so they host like these Zoom sessions where you can join and kind of give feedback or say what you'd like to see more of. And so it's kind of cool in that regards that even though it's in Canada, they do pay attention to members living in Washington, Idaho, Montana, wherever you might have. And then the other thing I was going to mention really quickly in comparison to that is so there's also a lot of Métis in Montana and North Dakota, as I'm sure you know, and so there's you do get participation like the Métis Festival in Choteau that's held every year. So I've been to that a couple times, and so I really enjoy going to that and being a part of like the Métis culture that is present there, and that's a lot where my mom's side of the family has came from is Montana, Choteau, Teton Canyons, Cascade, Augusta areas over there.
That's the Little Shell area right there.
Yeah,
You just named the homelands right
it
there.
is. Yeah. Yep.
People just don't realize we got pushed from that to where, that's the problem. All that land that was taken there. There's some beautiful land, and like
Yeah.
my family right there, you say Teton Canyon, that's where my great grandpa was. He was born in that canyon. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's right there, right? Little Shell and he's also Blackfeet as well. So it's like you have
Yeah.
that both, right? There's our family.
Yeah.
And it's really good. It's cool. You definitely need to come out to the powwow in August. We just built the arbor last year, so it'll be
Yeah. I
popping.
haven't I haven't been out to it since I think 2023. But yeah, definitely need to come out, see the new arbor and everything would be super cool.
Well, and there should be camping up there too.
Oh, okay.
So I know a lot of people like to camp for the tent camp. Bring your trailer camp up for the
Yeah.
there's a
Sweet.
lot of space for that. So I know some
Yeah.
people brought their teepees.
Oh,
Yeah,
nice.
Yeah.
it's a pretty
That's
cool
awesome.
setup up on the hill there and everything. And I was out there with Zach this last year. It was a good. It's becoming a big powwow now. We can officially say that after this last year.
Matt's
Yeah.
gonna try and join the powwow committee. That's what that is. That's what that means.
No,
Nice.
I'm Lakota guys a little further out east.
Yeah. Are you guys gonna plan to be there this year at the powwow?
Yeah, I'll be
Yeah,
there. I
yeah,
help out and whatnot. Like always volunteer when you can, you know what I mean?
Okay, yeah.
That's kind of the main event I like going to.
Yeah.
well, and it's nice weather. It's like 80 and sunny, like late
Oh yeah.
August, just perfect. Just
Yeah.
great weather.
And you're in Montana, yeah, exactly. That's the
Yeah.
best time to be in Montana.
Yeah, definitely.
And now we'd like to take the time to pause and take you to Music on a Native podcast, where we feature Native musicians and artists. This week we're going to feature Bonnie Bavoyer, the duck dance, fiddle tune, and give you some of that Métis music. And that was Bonnie Bavoyer, duck dance, fiddle tune.
What's the difference in your? I'm still kind of unsure. What from like Métis and then like the reserves, the like the or the native population, indigenous. What they're called First Nations, right, up in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a little more on that, based on your knowledge of being Métis?
I mean, I can speak to the little knowledge I do have as being
Okay.
Métis, but also living in the US my whole life but as I understand it, the Canadian federal government recognizes three indigenous populations, the First Nations, the Métis, and the Inuit. In the US, the federal government recognizes American Indians, which are the tribes, and then Alaskan Natives. Which would be similar to the Inuit that the Canadian government recognize. So the US doesn't recognize the Métis, Canada does. But then in Canada, the First Nations have the treaty and the land rights similar to the tribes here in the US. And the Métis, um, this is where my limited knowledge comes in. I don't know if they have a land base or not, but they don't have a reserve like the First Nations do. But they do get some provincial harvesting rights for their land that the Métis in the US don't have. So they do have some rights, but just not, I don't think they have quite as many rights as that comes along with having a reserve or your own land. But that's the extent of my knowledge.
That makes sense. I just haven't done much research into the Métis history myself, so I was curious, kind of.
To me, that what you described, Connor, sounds almost somewhat similar to maybe state tribes or Native Hawaiians because they have some rights, but it's only with that state because they're not like federal in a sense or have a land base. Trying to think of a comparable.
But they are federal though, which is
Yeah,
interesting.
so actually that's a really
But
good
yeah, I don't know.
that's a really good comparison, Matt. So the Métis, and that goes back to what I was saying, the Manitoba Métis Federation now has that federal recognition piece where they didn't before.
Oh,
Prior to that, it was called the Métis National Council, and each province was had their Métis Nation representative at the National Council, and that National Council was the governing body on the federal level. When that it disbanded 5 years ago or something. It's something like that. And then the Manitoba Métis Federation kind of popped up as that new federal level entity, kind of. So that's a really good comparison, Matt. Whereas before, each nation, it was kind of like having state right as a rights as a state recognized tribe, but not a federally recognized tribe. And now the Manitoba Métis Federation is trying to get more of the federal rights.
That makes sense. Now that
Yeah.
you put it that way, yeah. And then yeah, the fact that they kind of disbanded, like you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Do you? So I guess what got you started in your podcast? Kind of your research and whatnot, or
Yeah, it was, I think a big part of it is probably because I grew up outside of Montana and outside of our community. And so, obviously I, told from a young age, we're Chippewa, we're my grandma, her mom used to tell her about French Canadian Indians is what she would call us. And so I had this identity, but I didn't have an extended community to, really get cultural stories or teachings from. And so that kind of gap, I think, is what really inspired me to do more of my own research, my own reading, and then go beyond the family, the immediate family history, of my siblings, aunts, uncles, grandparents, great grandparents, and go even beyond that to more historic times, just because I didn't have that from our community because we were in Washington. And so
Right.
I came to the point about a year or two ago where I had all this that I have researched, read, knowledge from talking to people, going back to like the Métis Festival in Shoto or the powwow, and it was just something that realistically, I think I'll probably live here in Washington most of my life. And so it's these stories and things that I want to have for my family and my descendants so that they have that in the same way that I didn't have it, but I had to learn it for myself. I wanted to create a platform where, my family and descendants has something to listen to hear these stories, to hear, relatives speak who might not be around in 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And so just really thinking about how can I best, preserve this identity that I have and pass it along in, a way that my mom and grandma passed on to me.
Oh wow. No, that's a really good way of doing it and documenting it
Hmm.
and keeping it. Are there any goals along those lines that you've set out for yourself that you'd like to obtain?
Um, I don't have, I don't think so. I think I kept it pretty loose in creating it because, for a while I wanted to write a book, which I laugh about now because it's like there's no way I could stay focused long enough to finish a book. But a podcast, you got an hour or so just to sit down and talk with people, and then it's recorded, it's on a platform, people can access it. And so my I think it's just that my goal is just to, get as many interviews with like family members, relatives, other people as I can to really preserve this identity and share these stories. And so just because it's so broad, I don't really have any super specific goals other than that.
Oh, that's cool. No, it's always fun to have that. That's kind of Wandering Ways, the a nature podcast I did before I did this one with a different friend. Me and Mark did that one, and kind of same thing. We just free flow, talk about our trips, talk about that. Me and Matt have a little more structure. I don't know if you saw that with this one.
Mhm.
This was spurred off the idea of a phone call because me and Matt would sit there and be like, "Well, did you see what Deb Holland did today, or did you see this going on, or did you see what Jonathan Nez dropped a podcast,
Yeah,
Navajo Nation former president." So no, just things like that me and Matt chat about. We're like, we need to have that, and then also have that tool of educating those more about the culture, more about those doing things in the culture. Like today, like you, occupational therapy, right? Like
hmm,
having that and talking about it from your perspective, from the indigenous perspective of saying, hey, we got to do it a certain way. Can't do it your way. You can't fit not the first thing we learn as kids, right? You can't fit a square in a
right.
hole, right? Like you gotta make it work for that community or that culture. So
Yeah,
it is whole circle that way.
100%.
Yeah. Yeah. And Connor, I was gonna say, if you were willing to have a non-Little Shell member on the podcast, I think you and I might be a good idea to focus on our experience of growing up outside of our tribal homeland, because I think, and in the Northwest, we probably have some relatability there. If you're willing to have a Lakota on your podcast.
Oh, 100%, man. Heck yes. I'll
So,
I'll set that up because I really think it'd be great to have both of you on, and maybe it could be separate episodes, so it could be kind of
yeah.
different topics. But
Yep.
I mean, that's kind of what I love about keeping the podcast so open in general, is it's just like, want to sit down and have a conversation with you, Matt, about growing up outside of our homelands, or even about how our degrees are related in kind of these health fields for
All right.
raising awareness of disparities for Native peoples. And so that's what I also love about podcasts, because I'll just sit down and talk to anybody for however long. So, I mean, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah,
Well, it's
yeah,
fun.
and, you and Zach too could talk about your families and little shell stuff, and it helps each other's podcast because we're here to get ourselves out there, but we like to help others too on the. So, actually, our buddy Brian Begay, I don't know if you saw his interview.
I
Um,
did not.
he's Navajo. He's a wildlife biologist, and he actually, after being on our podcast, his boss's friend saw it or something, and so he's now like a wildlife society member. He got a free membership
Oh, that's
out of,
awesome.
out of the exposure that we gave him. So
Yeah, that's
So
awesome.
someone
yeah,
Googled Navajo wildlife biologist on
yeah, yeah.
and his episode went to the top. That's what probably happened,
Ryan McGay, he spoke Navajo right in the beginning.
Yeah, they're like, oh, this guy's legit. And Reddit, him and Matt were
That's super
dicking
cool.
around in college together. No, you guys, they had a study group at Oregon State
we
together.
we had like a native graduate kind of study group at the Longhouse, and he kind of feeling out of place being from Arizona and very, far from home. And
Mhm.
yeah.
Well, and it's fun doing these podcasts, being relaxed like this, because like it's always fun because you can bring up the time. Like Matt, we're in Rapid City, right? For work. We're there for
Oh,
Lakota Nation. It's a big basketball tournament, really cool event in Rapid City, South Dakota,
yeah.
and it's a big basketball tournament of all the native schools, as well as some of the local Rapid City like white schools were there too, which is really cool. But they also have a powwow, like a volleyball tournament, like archery was there. There was a bunch of other events that they do it with. And Matt was sit there as Matt is, on Tinder and, and matched with his cousin. So
I
that's
matched,
how small Indian country
I
is.
legitimately, the one match I got for the few days we were there, and I was like, tall native woman with long hair. And I'm like, okay, so before we go any
He was in
further,
love.
before we go any further,
Pump
who
the
are you
brakes.
related to? And so her mom was a pumpkin seed, which is my grandma's side. And I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? That's my grandma's family.
Oh
We
shoot.
were legit first cousins, we found out. And I was like,
Legit,
these are
too.
real stories that happen in Indian country.
Oh yeah.
So
Well, that's why we need Matt was saying, I got it. I've been on all the apps. I can make a native app. So you filter your cousins out. Don't see,
Yeah.
got to fill out a tree first.
Well, I think it was in Iceland because it's just an island and it's not a huge population, and their dating app actually prevents like whatever cousins from matching. Have you guys heard of that?
I'm sure Iceland's only, I was there 2 years ago, 2023 in June, and it's 300,000 people.
Yeah.
And it's Reykjavik, the main town, is 100,000 people.
Yeah.
That's like Billings, right? Billings,
Yeah.
Montana. That's that size. And then the rest are just spread out. And it's as big as Montana. Montana is
Yeah.
1 million people. Think of how remote Montana is.
Right.
It's crazy. I mean, it's cool. If you ever get the chance to go, I know both Seattle and Portland fly direct.
They do, yeah.
And me and my buddy Mark, we rented a van, did the island in a week. I want to go back. I would move there.
Yeah.
Like I live here in Wolf Point. It's -23. It doesn't get that much worse there.
Yeah.
You know
No.
what I mean? Like
Yeah.
more consistent wildlife. The people there, like it's weird. Like you talk about Métis, actually, this is kind of cool. This is why you have these conversations, is when you talk about Métis and the way like they care for the land, they like the land. To me, it's they're the people that came over during the Hudson fur trapping and said, we want to live the native lifestyle. We've accepted what it takes to live on North America, this continent. There's indigenous people here. This is how you live. And the Icelanders kind of have a similar lifestyle there, where like they don't really develop the land. They kind of let it be natural. They live one with nature. It's very in harmony that way. So it's kind of cool that how that is, and how you see that. In the U.S. obviously just trying to prevent that.
Mhm.
yeah,
That
and
for another
I
day.
see on your questionnaire there, Connor, that you're planning a trip to Denmark, it looks like this summer.
Yes, that's true. And we'll actually, so my wife and I are going to Denmark. That's where my dad's side of the family's from. So
Oh, okay.
yeah, that's where the last name Kankelborg comes from. It's not Michif, it's not Chippewa.
That's still cool though.
Yeah, it's Danish. So we're going to Denmark and we'll actually have, I think it's like a 2 or 3 hour layover we have in Iceland, but it's definitely on the list to go back to and spend more time at.
Do you have more time like that you could tack on?
No, it's pretty
Oh,
sandwiched already. I wish.
are you flying Icelandic Air? Is
We
that
are, yeah.
so? They will give you 2 weeks, so you can make your layover 2 weeks long, and they won't add price to it. So they're
So
trying to keep you to stay.
I heard about that after we booked the tickets and after we already booked some
Like you
things in
stay and
Denmark.
stuff.
So
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, and it's kind of sandwiched between school stuff, and so it's like, oh, but it's
Denmark's gonna
on the
be
list.
amazing.
Yeah.
What's that?
Denmark's gonna be amazing.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited for it.
Are you just going to Copenhagen?
Yeah, we'll be there for most of the time, and then we'll also be visiting the northern peninsula part of Denmark and the Isle of Moors, which is where my dad's family comes from. So visit some cousins up there, and then
Oh, really?
we'll go back out to Copenhagen to fly back to the US.
That's cool. To
Yeah.
see family too. That like I've had friends that have done that have seen family. It's always good to reconnect with people.
Mhm.
Whether it's Tinder or going to the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've I actually speak a good amount of Spanish, Connor, and so I've been to Oaxaca, Mexico by
Mhm.
myself. If you want to experience indigenous culture in Mexico, Oaxaca is the place to go.
Okay.
Because it doesn't have as much Spanish influence. It's more like, okay, the women are braiding their hair, they weave rugs, they're speaking Zapotec. I'm like, this is like
Mhm.
really cool, you know. So I've always had a strong interest with Latin America indigenous, and I'm trying to maybe go to
Really,
South America this summer. So see.
really, Matt's had that. What? What?
I think that's
No.
where I'm going.
That'd be awesome.
You ever heard this man talk? He loves south of the border,
Uh,
everything. Everything.
All right.
The food, the women,
all
mainly the women. That's
all
what I'm
of
trying to get at.
He
all of
doesn't
Matt's looking for his.
it.
I promise you that.
he doesn't have to worry about first cousins there, huh?
No, that's exactly it. I like the dark, you know, the darker haired, you know. I
Uh,
like with a different culture. I like the cultures and the traditionalness of that, you know. So
oh, I just like giving
Yeah.
you a hard time. That's what I like. But I got to be that guy. We're kind of coming towards the end of it. Connor, thank you so much again. This has been a wonderful time. Definitely have to, if you come to the powwow, we'll have to get dinner or something one of the nights that we're there, or lunch or something,
Yeah.
or whenever you're in Montana. I'm closer to North Dakota though than I am Washington. But Matt's
Yeah.
in Salem,
I'm in
Salem.
Salem, Oregon
So
area. So
if you're
yeah.
ever in the Portland area, I know he's nearby, so definitely something to do. But kind of this is our time, our final words. I definitely want you to get your podcast out there, let them know where to find it, how to find it, what time it's at, all that fun, good stuff. The time is yours.
All right. Yeah. So my podcast is Of All My Relatives. Right now, it's only on Spotify. It's going through the review thing to get on Apple Podcasts. So it'll be there eventually. But for now, it's just on Spotify. It's also on Instagram at the same IG handle Of All My Relatives. So you can find it in either place. Instagram is good to follow because I also do other posts as it relates to, me and my family's Chippewa and Métis identity. And so what you miss out on Spotify, you can catch on Instagram. And other than that, thank you guys for having me on. It's good to be on the other side of the podcast for once, and it was really fun talking to you guys.
You're like, I don't have to edit this one.
I
Fun.
know exactly, exactly. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is so nice. Yeah.
Yeah, that's how Matt feels every day. Matt.
Yeah, no, no, Connor is good talking, and we'll all of us will stay in contact for maybe being on yours, and I'd love, you know, with where we have some commonality talk, and of course you guys too, little shell stuff. So
Yeah, for sure. I'm down in Portland pretty often, probably once,
oh, really?
1 or 2 every 1 or 2 months. Yeah, I still have family in Vancouver, so
Oh, okay. Yeah, I
we,
can't say I go up to Tacoma, Seattle. I really don't like traffic that much, so
yeah,
I've heard it's pretty bad up there nowadays.
yeah. But maybe we could meet up in Portland for an in-person episode for of all my relatives. And Zach, I'll get you on a Zoom episode.
Yeah, and then I do come out to Portland every once in a while. My parents live in Newburgh, so
Oh, okay. Okay.
let you know the next time I'm going out there, and definitely that'd be cool. Sit down like I saw your one with Crystal Trey at a coffee
Yeah.
shop. I think that was in Portland.
It
Yeah.
it was in Portland, yeah.
Oh, nice.
We'll have to find. And then we'll have actually a G&G, our G&G building this summer, fall or something. I believe we'll have a opening out there in Oregon. So we'll have to invite you down for that.
Yeah, definitely.
It'll be a good creative space.
Yeah.
But again, I want to thank you. Thank you, Matt, as always. Everybody for listening. We really do appreciate it. We're slowly building. We have these interviews. We have those episodes. We have you, the fans, and we really do appreciate it. And until next time, bye-bye.
There you go.
I know
Bye.
violence, I know chiefs, I know riders from the east, I know educated natives down to picket in the streets, middle fingers to police, fuck you, we come in peace. I know red-skinned hippies that be giving me the creeps. I know beauty, I know beast, I know savages and freaks, and I know a couple cousins even bougier than me. No, ain't elite, bougie native, yes indeed. Art exhibit to the club, and we roll it 20 deep. Copper on my neck, gold on my ring, feather on my hat, skin stitched chin, 100 warriors on my back, they be drumming when I sing, man there ain't no way around it.
A Native Podcast is produced by G&G Advertising and Quartz Lake Productions.